Like the rest of Britain in the early 1970s, steam could still be found in southern England, although with hardly any major coalfields, the type of industry worked by steam was markedly different. You will see some colliery work in this programme, but we shall also be visiting power stations, chemical plants, docks, an industrial estate, and, as is the case here, paper mills. The southeastern corner of England is the most heavily populated area in the country, with the capital city providing a magnetic field to the surrounding area. A number of major towns had hardly any heavy industry in the 1970s, and therefore no steam working. They had already become dormitories for London office workers. But in some areas, notably the eastern side, all manner of manufacturing could be found, including, at bottom right, the once important Kent coalfield, giving a flavour of the north. There was also a coalfield in Somerset, which we'll be looking at later. North of the Thames, the industrial heartland began almost before the sound of bow bells had died away. And it's in that direction we head first, to the East Anglian countryside of Suffolk, at Sproughton to the northwest of Ipswich. The British Sugar Corporation's Ipswich base was located southwest of the former Great Eastern Railway main line between Ipswich and Stowmarket. By the time of this visit in 1974, the only steam loco to be found there was Peckett No. 2000 of 1942. It arrived at Ipswich from the Colic factory in October 1955 and was essentially a spare to a Ruston Hornsby diesel mechanical shunter. Because so many enthusiasts wanted to see the loco working, and because of the ban on individual visits, British Sugar steamed it at an annual demonstration, usually in late February or March, soon after the sugar beet harvest had been concluded. This is one such occasion. Held on a Saturday morning, the event generated a lot of interest, with many having the opportunity to ride on the footplate as the loco made numerous runs around the site. The Ipswich factory was opened in 1925, but the company's origins can be traced back to 1909 and the founding of the National Sugar Beet Association to establish sugar manufacture as an industry. At around the same time, the Lincolnshire Beet Sugar Company was formed and built a factory at Sleaford. However, the £130,000 needed to continue the project couldn't be raised, and the plans were dropped. Meanwhile, Dutch refiners were offering contracts to Norfolk farmers to grow beet for export to Holland, and in 1912 they set up a factory at Cantley to process the beet. Initially this operated at a loss and closed in 1916, but was reopened in 1920 by the English Sugar Beet Corporation. Two more factories were opened by the time of the Sugar Industry Subsidy Act of 1925. The Act, which took effect retrospectively from the 1924 crop, provided new enterprises with direct subsidies from the Exchequer, on a decreasing scale over 10 years. Investors were now more willing to come forward, and 15 more factories were built, including Ipswich in the 4 years from 1925 to 1928, bringing the total number of British sugar beet factories to 18. All were fiercely independent, but a world overproduction of sugar meant prices were dropping. In 1934, the government set up the Green Committee to assess the state of the industry. This resulted in a bill proposing the formation of the British Sugar Corporation. It was brought before Parliament in February 1936 and received the royal assent the following May. On June the 12th, the British Sugar Corporation was registered under the Companies Act, and all the independent factories became part of the organisation. In 1950, the government proposed the nationalisation of BSC, but a lack of parliamentary time scuppered the plan. In 1962, the last beet was carried by rail from Ipswich. Rationalisation and more productive factories caused their numbers to decline to only 10 by 1991, but those 10 were producing more tonnage than the entire industry a decade earlier. Ipswich closed during further rationalisation in 2001. The Peckett loco found its way into preservation at Wamsford near Peterborough in March 1977. In early 2008, it resides at Barrow Hill. We now move into Hertfordshire for a quick visit to Hoddesdon and Rye House Power Station. This facility was operated by the Central Electricity Generating Board. Rail access was via spurs to the southeast of the Great Eastern's Liverpool Street to Cambridge line. This visit in 1971 produced Robert Stevenson and Hawthorne's number 7597 of 1949, shunting wagons around the site. Much to the delight of enthusiasts, the loco often worked on Saturday mornings. The coal-fired power station opened in 1953. It was designed by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, who was also responsible for the iconic Battersea power station and Liverpool Cathedral. A second gas and oil power generator opened here in 1966, but both ceased production in March 1982 and were demolished. A new gas-fired station opened on the same site in 1993. Thanks to the confusing mess created by deregulation, it's now operated by Scottish Power. 7597 arrived new during the construction of the first power station and was initially used on construction trains. Steam operation finished at Hoddesdon in 1972, replaced by 3 diesel mechanical shunters. 7597 was preserved initially at Chapel and Wakes Colne, but is now undergoing restoration at Peak Rail's Darley Dale. Southeast now into Essex for a visit to Thurrock, best known today for its lakeside shopping centre. This part of Essex is a hive of industry. Proctor & Gamble's soap and detergent factory stood to the south of the Southend to Fenchurch Street line. Wagons were deposited in the exchange sidings alongside the main line and were tripped by P&G's own locos along a short branch. With so many chemicals in use, regular steam locos couldn't be used, so the company resorted to the fireless design. This is one of 2 employed at the site, Andrew Barclay number 1472 of 1916. For those of you who haven't seen Industry of Steam 2, here's a quick recap of how a fireless loco works. Instead of a boiler, it has a large insulated reservoir. This is charged, or filled up, from a stationary boiler, giving the loco enough stored steam to operate for between 2 and 4 hours. 1472 shunts a new arrival into the works across a public road alongside the site, a useful vantage point for watching the action and one that didn't need a permit or permission from the works owners. Although the Barclay is only hauling a single tanker, this type was surprisingly powerful and loads of up to 200 tonnes were well within its capabilities. The single wagon load is probably because of restrictions at the loading and unloading bay. However, this did produce a lot more activity when a train arrived at the exchange sidings. The works here was set up by Thomas Headley and Company in 1940. Procter & Gamble took it over in 1962 when the American soap giant bought up the whole of Headley's. The other loco working here at Thurrock was a Bagnall 060, number 2370 of 1929, which was slightly more powerful than the Barclay 040. Procter & Gamble was formed in Cincinnati, USA in 1837 by an English candle maker, Proctor, and an Irish soap maker, Gamble. They had met when they married a pair of sisters. The company grew steadily in the 19th century, and by the early 20th century, factories were springing up in other parts of the USA, with diversification into other areas as well. P&G is indirectly responsible for the term soap opera, having sponsored undemanding drama on American radio from the 1920s onwards, which later became undemanding drama on television. The company's 20th century prosperity allowed its first expansion into Britain in 1930. 20 years later, it was also producing laundry detergents and shampoo here, and the first toothpaste to contain fluoride, Crest. Expansion across the rest of the world through acquisitions and new product design soon allowed the company to venture into toilet paper, fabric softeners, makeup, and the appalling Old Spice aftershave. In 2005, P&G acquired Gillette and its various brands, including Duracell, Braun and Oral-B, making it the world's largest consumer goods company, with annual sales in excess of a staggering $10 billion. Returning from the world of high commerce, steam operations at the Thurrock site finished in the mid-1970s. Barclay 1472 was saved and is now at the Bressingham Steam Museum, unlike the Bagnall, which was scrapped. The appeal of preserving fireless locos is limited, as the necessary filling equipment isn't available at most preserved sites, so a conventional loco will be needed to provide alternative steam. Even so, 29 of the breed, including 1472, survive around Britain. We cross the River Thames now and head into East Kent for a look at the black stuff mentioned earlier. Betshanger Colliery was served by a branch from the South Eastern Railway's line between Sandwich and Deal. This visit took place in February 1970. Coal was discovered in the Liddon Valley near Deal in December 1912, and after World War I, Dorman Long and Company bought the mineral rights to great tracts of land in the area. Kent coal burned very hot, making it highly suitable for the steel industry. Soon after the rights acquisition, Dorman Long joined forces with S. Pearson & Sons to form Pearson & Dorman Long Limited. This company also had a controlling interest in the Channel Steel Company, so it was a perfect arrangement. Dormans built a railway line to the site of its new Betshanger colliery, where the first shaft was sunk in May 1924. On the day of this visit, Hudswell Clark number 1754 of 1943 was in action on spoil duties. The loco carried the number 12 and once had a name, Arthur Leighton. Previously, it had worked regularly at Foxfield Colliery in Staffordshire on what is now the preserved Foxfield Railway. Another 3 steam locos were also on site. 2 Hunslet Austerities, 3825 and 3827, both of 1954 vintage, and the Yorkshire Engine Company's 2440 of 1948. Betshanger was the largest of the Kent mines, with shafts 24 feet in diameter. It flooded twice during its sinking, but used the cementation process to seal the sides of the shafts. Thereafter, the underground tunnelling progressed quickly, and coal was reached in 1927. Number 12 draws forward from the sidings with a train of tippler wagons containing fine coal particles from the settling ponds at the washer, before taking them to the tip area for drying out. Also note the 2 16-ton mineral wagons, which were probably used for locomotive coal. They've had their ends knocked out to make bunkering up easier. Virtually overnight in 1927, 1,500 miners and their families came down to live in Deal, the nearest town to the pit. At the time, the town was a genteel seaside resort, and the arrival of these, quote, rough and dirty men with unintelligible accents, unquote, horrified many of the residents. Lodging houses, cafes and pubs soon had signs up saying, no miners, while butchers and grocers sold the worst quality goods as cheap miners' specials. After depositing its load of particles, number 12 returns to the colliery. Deputies' houses were built close to the pit, but it wasn't until 1929 that the farmlands of Mill Hill on the outskirts of Deal were acquired for a new colliery estate for the workers. Betshanger attracted many of the hardline union men who had been blacklisted in their home areas after the general strike of 1926, and as a result, the Betshanger miners were often regarded as the most militant in Kent. In 1938, a strike was called when some of the pit boys refused to accept the behaviour of the 2 deputies supervising them. Later in the day, the rest of the pit boys and all the colliers joined them. The latter because the pit couldn't run properly without the lads. Work only resumed after the company agreed to hold a public inquiry. Betshanger was the only pit to strike during the Second World War, this time over allowances for working a difficult seam, where the conditions changed from week to week. Because it was wartime, the strike led to 3 union officials being imprisoned, while more than 1,000 men were given the option of a fine or hard labour. Harder than coal mining, presumably. The government feared the dispute might spread to other pits, the last thing it needed in the middle of a war. So when all but 9 of the Betshanger men refused to pay their fines, the government backed down and released the union officials, having realised it could hardly imprison all 1,000 of the workers. When the coal industry was nationalised in 1948, the Kent collieries became part of the National Coal Board's South Eastern Division. Sadly, Betshanger was never allowed to develop to its full potential, its quotas restricted, which may seem strange in the immediate aftermath of war, when its steel industry grade coal should have been much in demand. Its day's work complete, the Hudson Clark returns to the shed. Steam operations finished the following year, when the steam locos were replaced by 3 former BR diesel shunters. One of the Hunslets, 3825, moved to Snowdown colliery, where the other 3 locos were scrapped. 1754 has its fire dropped and then goes through a process called blowing down the boiler, which removes the sediment from the firebox to keep the water space clean and aid steaming. This was achieved by using a valve located on the loco's frame. Betshanger was the last colliery to survive in Kent, closing in 1989. We now move west about 8 miles to Snowdown colliery. This one was located next to the London, Chatham and Dover Railway's Dover to Canterbury main line. The exchange sidings by the main line were equipped with overhead electric wires in the 1950s to allow the Southern Regions Class 71 locos to work onto the site, collecting current through pantographs rather than the more usual third rail for safety reasons. This visit in 1974 begins at the loco shed, with Avonside number 2004 of 1927 moving off. The loco carried the name St Dunstan. Here it's shunting the main colliery yard. Snowdown colliery was begun by Arthur Burr's Foncage Syndicate in 1907. The first shaft hit water at 260 feet and flooded, drowning 22 men. There were few sinking problems after the initial disaster, and Snowdown became the first commercial pit to open in Kent. The first coal was brought to the surface from a depth of 1,370 feet in November 1912. In January 1913, the so-called Beresford seam was reached. At 5 feet 6 inches thick, it enabled 800 tonnes to be mined each week. A second loco could be found in steam on this visit too, Hamslet number 3825 of 1954, which had transferred from Betshanger. The loco carried the number 9 and was missing a dome cover. 2 more locos on the site were built by Avonside. They were similar to St Dunstan and carried the names St Thomas and St Martin, although both were out of use on this day. A damaging strike took place here in 1921. A 1920 Act of Parliament, the Emergency Powers Bill, had temporarily increased wages for 6 months. When they were reduced again at the end of the period, the strike ensued. With the owners running down the colliery anyway, Snowdown went into receivership. It closed in 1922, but pumping operations were maintained so the site could be sold as a working mine. After 2 years in this mothballed state, Snowdown was bought in 1924 by Pearson and Dorman Long, who, you'll remember, were running Betshanger. The company completely modernised the colliery and then bought a 600-acre site and a public utility society, Aylsham Tenants Limited. The resulting Aylsham village housed 650 families close to the colliery, whereas the previous Snowdown miners had mostly lived in Dover. Number 9 heads a train of coal around to the exchange sidings. Snowdown was the deepest colliery in Kent, reaching down well over 3,000 feet. It was also the hottest and most humid pit in the country, earning the name Dante's Inferno from its miners. It was regarded by many as the worst pit to work at in Britain, and most Snowdown miners worked naked because clothes became too uncomfortable. Each of them could consume around 24 pints of water in an 8-hour shift, and there were frequent cases of heat stroke. While we watch the two locos going about their work, here's a brief summary of the story of coal in Kent. Geologists first speculated that there was coal beneath the county in the 1840s, but it wasn't until 1890 that the theory was properly investigated. 10 years earlier, work had begun at Shakespeare Cliff on the first serious attempt at the Channel Tunnel between Dover and Calais, but in 1882 the government halted the work while it considered the military implications of making it easier to reach these shores, a passing concern when the successful tunnel was finally dug in the 1990s. With its workers standing idle, the 1880s tunnel company decided to use them instead to drill boreholes to investigate Kent's geology. Within 2 years, both coal and iron ore had been discovered. Curiously, shareholders of the Channel Tunnel Company declined the opportunity to exploit the coal, so in 1896, one Arthur Burr set up the Kent Coalfields Syndicate to buy the mineral rights and begin digging Shakespeare Colliery on the site of the old tunnel workings. Over the next 25 years, the embryonic Kent coalfield strayed perilously close to abandonment on numerous occasions. From 1896 onwards, more than 45 test bores were sunk in East Kent, and at least 10 collieries were started. But it took 16 years of continual investment before any commercial coal was brought to the surface. Here at Snowdown. St Dunstan retires to the shed and soon after is joined by a former BR diesel shunter, 12131. Like number 9, this one had transferred across from Betshanger. Steam working finished here in the late 1970s. Number 9 was preserved and can now be found awaiting repairs at Carnforth. St Dunstan is at the East Kent Railway, St Thomas at Sellinge, but St Martin was scrapped when Snowdown closed in 1987. We now move back north to the banks of the Thames estuary at Northfleet near Gravesend for a look at the Imperial paper mills. This self-contained system was built to serve the mill from a loading and unloading jetty where raw materials and finished product were lifted from and back to boats and barges. During this visit in 1973 we catch a quick glimpse of Fireless Barclay 1496 of 1916, before Andrew Barclay 1471 of 1916 appears moving paper around the mill. This loco carried the number 2. Not surprisingly, given the flammable nature of paper, only fireless engines were ever used here. There were numerous paper mills along the banks of the Thames, several of them serving the voracious appetite for newsprint of the former Fleet Street. A year earlier, we see Andrew Barclay 2373 of 1956, known as Imperial No. 1, but looking slightly less imperious with a badly dented steam reservoir. The Northfleet Mill was once part of the Amalgamated Press Company until it was sold in 1926 to Allied Newspapers, which itself had been set up by William and James Berry 2 years earlier. By the early 1970s, the paper mill was owned by Reed International, and its 1,200 employees were producing between 3,000 and 4,000 tonnes of paper a week. Number 2 rests between trips, while number 1 heads back to the jetty. Steam operation finished here in 1976 and the mill finally closed in 1981. Number 1 was handed over to the National Collection in 1976 for exhibition at the Railway Museum in York. In 2005 it moved to the new locomotion exhibition site at Shildon, where it can still be found today. All the other fireless locos at Northfleet were scrapped. Just along the river is Greenhithe and the Empire paper mills. This site had a connection to the main line as well as a jetty for moving its goods. It opened in 1908 and also followed the fireless route. This visit in 1971 records the final year of steam operations there. First up is Andrew Barclay number 1561 of 1917, one of 3 locos based at the site. All were replaced by diesel shunters later in the year and subsequently scrapped. Surprisingly, a conventional coal-fired loco, Peckett number 1880 of 1935, was used in the 1960s to bring wagons in from the exchange sidings, but Empire mills survived the potential hazard of flying sparks and produced paper until 1993. Time to head for the bright lights now. Well, the industrial sector of London at least. BR Western Region's decision to sell a number of former Great Western pannier tanks to London Transport for use on engineering trains certainly caused a bit of a stir. They work from 2 depots, Lillie Bridge near Earl's Court and Neasden, but could be found operating all over the surface sections of the network. This is Lillie Bridge in February 1971. L90, formerly BR's number 7760, based at Oxford Shed, shunts the sidings at this busy engineering depot. This was the second pannier to carry the L90 number. The first, the former 7711, was bought by LT in 1956, but withdrawn in October 1961. The first of 13 panniers to make the journey across from the Western region in the next 7 years. The big overhead crane moving up the yard was used for loading materials into the engineering wagons. Also working on this day in 1971 was L94, the former 7752. This one arrived from Tondy Shed in South Wales in November 1959. Both L90 and L94 were built at the North British Locomotive Works in 1930. The panniers replaced ageing E-Class 044 tank locos, the first of which dated back to 1898. L90 appears again at Lillie Bridge in early June 1971 in the last few days of steam operation on London Transport. Neasden was the other base for the panniers. In May 1971, L95 stands in the yard. The former 5764 had been acquired in May 1960 from the nearby Old Oak Common shed. This one was a Swindon product, built in 1929. The first two bought by LT were withdrawn by October 1961 and replacements sought. By 1963, this had resulted in a fleet of 11 panniers in use on engineering services. The first of those was withdrawn in 1966, L96. Exactly a year later, two more were taken out of traffic, L91 and L93. L97 and L98 followed towards the ends of 1968, L92 in August 1969, and January 1970 saw the end of L89 and L99. L95 and the two we've already seen survived until the end in June 1971. L95 comes onto the shed at Neasden. Two panniers were in use on the last day of operation, the 6th of June 1971. The last train ran from Farringdon to Neasden, and the chosen loco, L94, passes Finchley Road on the trip out to Farringdon. Just north of Finchley Road, L94 heads back to Neasden. LT was a little surprised by the number of people who turned out to watch the event, but it was too late by then to make any capital out of the interest. L94 at Neasden with L90 on the back of a demonstration freight train running in the yard. All three locos from June 1971 survived into preservation, joining three more that had already passed into private hands, L89, L92 and L99. Staying in the London area, we moved down the road to Willesden and the central electricity generating board's Acton Lane power station, standing just to the south of the West Coast main line and connecting with it via a short spur. During this visit in 1973 there was no work going on, but the staff were more than happy to show off their locos. This is Robert Stevenson and Hawthorne's number 7386 of 1948, named Birkenhead. The loco had been delivered new to Bromborough Power Station in Cheshire, moving to Brimsdown in 1949. It had two spells at other power stations, Goldington from the summer of 1953 to the autumn of 1954, and then within weeks at Rye House. Birkenhead returned to Brimsdown in March 1965 and transferred to Acton Lane in May 1967. Birkenhead heads back to the shed to drag Andrew Barclay No. 2069 of 1939 out for photos. The Barclay carried the name Little Barford and arrived here from Goldington in July 1965. It had been delivered new to Little Barford and moved to Goldington in November 1963. Acton Lane's first power station opened in 1900 and closed in 1964, but not before a second was built in 1949. Rail traffic finished at Acton Lane in March 1981, but both locos survive today. Little Barford moved to the Foxfield Light Railway and Birkenhead to the GWR Preservation Group's base at Southall. Both left Acton Lane soon after the power station closed. We head out from London now, westwards along the Thames Valley, to Slough Trading Estate, run by Slough Estates, not surprisingly, and located in the west of the town, just north of the Great Western Main Line. 8 miles of track had been laid in total, but by the time of this visit in 1971, the transport of oil for the power station provided most of the work. 2 locos could be found here at this time. Number 5, Hudswell Clark 1709 of 1939, was actually working on the day of the visit, moving the oil tankers down to the exchange sidings by the main line. This loco was built for Slough Estates. The Slough Estates story began in 1920 when Sir Percival Perry and Sir Noel Mobbs led a group of investors who acquired the 600-acre site. The land was known as the Dump and contained no fewer than 17,000 cars, trucks and motorbikes left over from the war. The initial plan was to refurbish and sell them to meet the growing demand for vehicles in the 1.8 million square feet of covered workshops on the site. After the refurbishment, the vehicles were sold and the buildings leased back to local businesses. The industrial estate was born. It didn't take long for the site to develop. By 1926, such household names as Johnson & Johnson, Citroën, Gillette and Black & Decker were all based there. The railway was already in place with 3 locos in operation. Another early innovation was a power station to provide electricity to the estate's tenants at a highly competitive price. In 1932, probably the most famous resident arrived on site, the Mars Company, which is still making its range of confectionery there today. Steady growth followed in the ensuing years, with most of the original buildings replaced at least once as the estate continued to evolve. In 2008, more than 20,000 people are employed there by 400 companies, including the firm that pressed this very DVD. We can't guarantee it was shunted by steam though. The owning company also runs industrial estates in France, Germany, Belgium, Canada and the USA. The original model of managing its own land, rather than subcontracting the task, enables the company to stay in close touch with its tenants and thus develop and evolve. The other loco on the site in the 1970s was another Hudswell Clark, number 1544 of 1924. This one carried the number 3 and was built for Slough Estates. After dropping off its wagons for a BR diesel to collect, number 5 heads back to the shed and our cameraman takes up the offer of a ride. The Slough Estates Railway closed on the 24th of April 1973. With only the oil traffic to the power station remaining, it was thought more cost effective to run a pipeline from the exchange sidings direct to the burners. Very little of the track work can be found today, thanks to the constant redevelopment of the past 30 years. Although number 5 was saved and moved to Emsay in July 1973. A month later, number 3 moved to the Mid-Hants Railway. Continuing west along the course of the Thames Valley, we reach Reading and the Early Power Station. This stood on the eastern side of the town, just north of the Great Western Main Line. The station was opened in 1942, and 2 Robert Stevenson and Hawthorne's 040s were built specifically for use there. By the time of this visit in April 1972, only one remained, number 7058 of 1942, and it was only acting as a spare to this diesel mechanical shunter, Barclay number 422 of 1958. Once again, helpful depot staff arranged for 7058 to be dragged out of the shed for photos. The power station closed in 1977 and 7058 was subsequently saved at the Lillie Railway. The diesel moved on to Farthingstone silos. The scenery changes now as we head into Oxfordshire. The Ministry of Defence depot at Bicester connected to the BR network on the former London North Western line between Bletchley and Oxford. This once extensive system operated both freight and internal passenger workings. The visit took place as part of an RCTS rail tour in 1972. At the time, 6 diesel locos operated at the site, with a solitary Hunslet austerity steam loco, number 3797 of 1953, kept in reserve. It carried the number 197 and the name The Sapper. Passengers on the tour were treated to a good run around the system, no doubt pleasing the track scratchers on board if they could find the layout in a book. The railway system operated like a microcosm of the national network, with semaphore signalling in place. The railway was built in 1941 within the Bicester Central Ordnance Depot. It was used extensively during World War II and again in 1982 during the Falklands War. Dr. Beeching's axing lists had the railway down for a good chopping in the mid-1960s, but a visit by Prime Minister Harold Wilson in 1965 brought about a reprieve. He overruled Beeching's decision. There are still approximately 40 miles of standard gauge track on the system, and it's the base for 275 Railway Squadron and a unit of the Royal Logistics Corps. Loco 197 had worked at various army locations, including Longmoor in 1957, before arriving at Bicester. In 1977 it moved to the Kent and East Sussex Railway, and for 2 years sat in a siding at Willesden, still under MOD ownership. In October 1979 a group of the railway's members bought the loco. Following an overhaul it re-entered service in 1981 and is still operational today. Although we're heading further west now, we're staying with the Army theme for our next port of call at MOD Long Marston. In later years, the depot was reached by a line running from the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway near Honeybourne. Over 18 miles of track made up the Long Marston Railway. This visit took place in 1977 during an open day at the site. Resident Austerity Hunslet 3798 of 1953 was in action at the event, carrying the number 98 and providing trips around the system in one of the MOD's converted coaches. Although built for the MOD in 1953, 98 didn't enter service until 1956 at the General Stores sub-depot at Steventon. It moved to Bicester in 1958 and finally to HQ Engineer Resources at Long Marston in 1961. After a long period in store, the loco was restored to full working order and given the name Royal Engineer in 1971. A further overhaul followed in 1988, and when withdrawn from service in 1991, number 98 became the last operational steam loco owned by the Army. It was acquired by the Royal Corps of Transport Museum and Trust for eventual display at the new museum under development at Chatham. In the meantime, Royal Engineer went on loan to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, and following the fitting of Westinghouse air brake equipment, was put to work on passenger services. The Long Marston site is now in private ownership, providing secure storage for displaced locos and coaching stock from the national network. For our final MOD visit, we head south to the coast. The Marchwood military port connected to the main line network at roughly the halfway point along the Southern Railway's branch to Fawley. This is 1978 and another open day, at which Hunslet 3792 of 1953 was in action. This one was delivered to the Army in January 1953, one of the very last batch of 14 austerity-type locos ordered by the War Department. Numbered WD192, it was put to work on the Longmoor Military Railway in Hampshire, but was reported to be at Hoddesdon in July 1955 and Bicester in May 1959. By May 1961, it was in store at Long Marston. In 1968, it was renumbered WD92 and named Wagoner in recognition of its service with the Royal Corps of Transport. In April 1969, the loco went into store at Shoebury-in-Ess until 1974, when it transferred to Marchwood to work the internal passenger service. It continued to work around the dockyard system until 1979, when a 10-year boiler overhaul became due. Wagoner returned to Shoebury-in-Ess for the boiler work and a heavy overhaul. Even this late in the steam era, the Army retained a boiler repair facility at Shoebury to repair the steam cranes still in use on the ranges there. After its overhaul, Wagoner stayed at Shoebury to work VIP trains. In 1984, after a visit to the Aldershot Army Day, it moved to the Army Museum at Beverley. But following the museum's closure in 2003, the Isle of Wight Railway became its latest home in 2005. We now move on to Somerset and southern England's little-known other coal reserve. Kilmersdon could be reached only by a 160-yard 1-in-4 rope-worked incline, linking it to the Great Western Line between Radstock and Frome. This visit from June 1972 finds Peckett number 1788 of 1929 marshalling wagons at the colliery before their journey down the incline. A BR diesel shunter from Radstock provided power in the exchange sidings. The Peckett was ordered by the Rislington Collieries Company, which had taken over the site from Kilmersdon Collieries Company Limited in 1924. Apart from a few short visits to Norton Hill Colliery in the 1950s, the loco spent its entire working life retrieving Somerset coal. As for the incline, the process worked like this. The colliery loco brought one or two full wagons to the top, where chocks across the rails prevented their being shunted over. After an empty had been attached to the cable at the bottom, the full wagon was run down, bringing up the empty as it went by the process of unequal forces. The speed of the descent, though, was controlled by the Locos firemen with a pair of drum brakes. Kilmersdon Pit closed on the 28th of September 1973, but the Peckett was saved. You can find it today at the West Somerset Railway. The County of Cornwall provides the backdrop to the rest of the programme, starting with the first of two dock systems at Parr. The system here was connected by a link to the Newquay branch at St Blaise. To reach it, trains had to pass under the Penzance main line through an 8 feet high tunnel. Because of the low tunnel, the locos had to be built to a low profile, and because of the sharp curves within the dock area, with a short wheelbase. This is Bagnall number 3058 of 1953, showing both modifications. The loco was named Alfred. Another similar Bagnall was also on site at the time of this 1974 visit, number 2572 of 1937, named Judy. Unfortunately, it had been retired because of problems with its copper stays. Alfred was built for the Port of Parr and cost £7,500. 16 years earlier, Judy had cost only £1,200. Incidentally, the Alfred was Alfred Truscott, the port's manager and harbour master. Parr was developed as a mineral port by Joseph Treffry between 1829 and 1841. 50 vessels of 200 tons each could be accommodated in the harbour, while larger vessels could anchor in the bay and have their cargoes brought ashore by barge. New industries grew up around the harbour: wharves and saw yards, ship repairing facilities, and a smelting plant on a 50-acre site reclaimed from the sea. Shipbuilding was once a major industry too, producing schooners for the Newfoundland trade. Since 1964, Parr Harbour has been owned by English China Clay, who bought it from Treffry Estates. Under ECC's ownership, it became one of the busiest small ports in Britain, exporting around 1 million tonnes of clay annually. By the time these shots were taken, though, the port was in decline. Little Alfred even managed to run along the main line in 1955, when it was loaned to Pont's Mill near Luxullian. Dwarfed by the wagons, Alfred does a spot of shunting. It's widely believed that a visit to the Port of Parr by the Reverend Audrey in 1966 inspired the creation of his characters Bill and Ben in the Thomas books, as they bear a striking resemblance to Alfred and Judy. Regular steamworking finished here in December 1977, and Alfred was preserved the following January by the Cornish Steam Preservation Society at Bugle. The group has now relocated to the Bodmin and Wenford Railway, where Alfred remains a popular attraction. Its size makes it easier to transport than other engines, so it's been on various excursions. In April 1999, for example, it visited the North Cornwall port of Padstow for the town's first Fish and Ships Festival. It's also been to the West Somerset for Days Out with Thomas events, where the loco has made the entire 20-mile trip over the line. Some feat with such small wheels. In August 2002, Alfred went out again, this time to St Blaise and Parr, where, for the first time in 24 years, it could be seen moving around the docks while en route to the EWS yard at St Blaise for the first family open day. Judy was donated to the China Clay Museum at Wheal Martin, where it stayed for many years until November 2002, when reorganisation of the site resulted in a handover to the Cornish Steam Locomotive Preservation Society at Bodmin, where the loco is now undergoing restoration. Further along the Cornish coast is Falmouth. The docks stand at the end of the Great Western's branch from Truro. The port was set up by the Falmouth Docks and Engineering Company in 1859. This visit took place in June 1972, when 3 steam locos were still present. Number 5, Hudswell Clark 1632 of 1929, propels number 6, Peckett's 1530 of 1919 out of the shed, while also pulling number 3, Hawthorne Leslie 3597 of 1926. Number 5 did the work to position the other two for photos. Number 3 was originally known as Number 1 when it arrived at Falmouth in 1926. It gained the new number and the rather smart cast name and number plate in March 1955. Number 5 and Number 6 had arrived at Falmouth in October 1961 from the Cooperative Society at Earlham near Manchester. With the photo shoot shunting completed, Number 5 heads off for its day's work. Like most of the former Brunel-influenced area, the docks originally had broad gauge track, but was converted to standard gauge, along with the Falmouth branch, in 1882. Number 5's builders, Hudswell and Clark, was formed in Leeds in 1860 by W.S. Hudswell and John Clark. They not only built locos for industrial use, but also supplied them to mainline companies, such as the North Eastern Railway, the Cockermouth and Workington Railway, and the Barry Railway. However, most of their locos were sold for industrial use. By 1927, the company had built approximately 1,600 locos. During World War II, its 060 saddle tank became the standard austerity shunting design. The company produced its last steam loco in 1961, an 040 saddle tank, number 1893, for the National Coal Board. In the 101 years since it started, this brought the total production to 1,807. The company ceased trading in 1972, and the patterns, drawings and goodwill were bought by Hunslet. These oil trains were just part of the activity around the docks. The dry docks, used for ship repairs, also generated plenty of work, ferrying supplies to them. Falmouth's busiest period was during World War II, when the discovery of magnetic mines laid by the Germans to sink Allied ships resulted in a solution to the problem called degaussing. This involved fitting a live metal cable around a ship to deactivate the magnet in the mine, enabling safe passage over it. Ships were literally queuing up in Falmouth to be degaussed, and this became the buzzword of the time, as the docks worked round the clock to neutralise Teutonic aggression. In the final sequence of shots, Number 5 shunts up and down the wooden jetties, for no other reason than the cameraman asking the driver to do it. Steam kept going at Falmouth until 1986. Number 6 had already left in December 1978, moving to the Poldark Mining Museum at Weldron Forge near Helston. Number 5 left in February 1987 after it had been bought by Ken Cummings. Despite his passion for railway honour, he didn't really have anywhere to put it, but not to be thwarted, he and his wife bought an old cinema in St Mary Church near Torquay. This gave them plenty of space, and the idea of the museum quickly became reality. It opened in May 1987 as the Bygones Museum, complete with a replica Victorian street. The last steam loco to leave Falmouth, Number 3, moved to the Plym Valley Railway in May 1987. 20 years later, in October 2007, it moved on to the private Stackfold Barn Railway near Tamworth. So there you have it. industrial steam in southern England in the 1970s, significantly different to anything we found in the rest of Britain.